Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another video on transformative dialogue. Today, we're going to be looking at metacognition, a core pillar of transformative dialogue, what metacognition is, and we'll go over some questions you can ask to stimulate metacognition. So, what is metacognition? Metacognition is cognition about cognition or thinking about thinking. It's not about the content or substance about what we're thinking, it's about stepping back and examining our process of thinking, how we think and how we reason towards certain conclusions, right? So metacognition is a really important part of transformative dialogue because it involves that aspect of stepping back to look at the relationship you have to your beliefs and not challenging the content or substance of your beliefs, but you're looking at the relationship to your beliefs through examining how you think and reason towards certain conclusions instead of actually challenging the conclusion. So, what are some examples of metacognitive questions? So, metacognitive questions usually begin with how. So, asking, how did you think about that? How did you determine that? How did you arrive at the conclusion and so forth? Or asking, what is your criteria to determine something? There's different themes we can use metacognitive questions for. So, one would be debates about facts. So when you hit a wall about what's true and what's not true, what's real information and what's misinformation, instead of fighting about the facts themselves, you can step back and say, how do you determine what's real news and what's fake news, right? When it comes to sources, you can say, how do you determine which sources to trust and which sources to not trust, right? What goes into your calculation in determining which sources to trust or which sources not to trust, right? Or what variables are involved in your calculation where you make a determination on what to believe in and what not to believe in, right? You can use metacognition questions when you're exploring questions of value, right? So how did you determine that this issue should be valued more than this issue, right? If you're ranking the importance of different issues or different political questions on the hierarchy, how did you determine what's at the top of the hierarchy and how did you determine which issues are at the bottom of the hierarchy? How do you determine which issues are more important to focus on and which issues are less important to focus on? Right. So you're not asking which is the most important issue. You're asking how do you determine that that issue was the most important. You can also ask metacognitive questions around issues of framing, right? There are so many different ways to frame different debates, to frame abortion, to frame gun rights or gun control, right? To frame the war in Israel and Palestine. So instead of just saying what is the framing or what is the issue or what should we do or what is the problem, you can say, how did you determine to frame the issue in that way, right? How did you arrive at that particular framing? And what about that framing is important, right? So how did you select a certain framing? How did you land on framing the issue this way and not framing the issue in 30 different other ways, right? You can also ask the question, what is your criteria? What is your criteria to determine what is valuable or not valuable? What is your criteria in determining what is accurate, what is not accurate? And you can also use this question to get people to look at what makes for a successful policy or political move and what is not successful, right? So if there's a trade-off in something, how do you determine that that trade-off is worth it, right? If there are two competing values over a difficult trade-off around issue, how did you determine that certain part of the trade-off would supersede or trump the other part of the trade-off, right? If you're talking about implementing a policy, you can ask, what is your criteria to determine if the policy was successful or not? Right? What kind of feedback would you need to see to determine if that economic idea or that social issue, et cetera, worked out in the way that you intended for it to work out? And if there were some unintended consequences or other bad side effects from that policy, how do you determine if the policy was still worth it or not? Right. So you're really looking at what criteria people are using. And these criteria usually exist as these subconscious frames in the background. And you're bringing that subconscious frame of the background into the foreground to examine how these frameworks are used to determine key political decisions or choices that we make. So these are just some examples of metacognitive questions and how they can be really helpful when you hit a wall and disagree with someone on the specific facts or disagree on values or disagree on something specific. You can step back and try to sort out how people think about what's important or how they think about what's true instead of just debating what is important or what is true. All right, so thanks so much for watching. I'll see you back in our next two episodes where we'll discuss how to work the ladder of abstraction in a conversation and how to use questions that stimulate complexity of thinking to break down black and white binaries. All right, I'll see you there.